Well, to discuss this, I'm joined now from London by Jasper. He's a political strategist and Labour Party activist. Also in the UK, we have Thom Brooks. He's the Dean at Durham Law School. And in London, we have Phillip Blond. He's a commentator on economics for ResPublica, a conservative think tank. Gentlemen, I thank you all for joining us here on the Newsmakers. Jasper, let me start with you. What do you make of Boris Johnson's resignation? Did he make the right decision? Is it, I guess, in a way, good for the UK that he's resigned?
Well, it's certainly good for Boris Johnson, seeking to position himself in relation to taking the Prime Minister's job, ultimately. So I don't think we can be fooled by the explanation that Boris Johnson resigned on principle. Had it been a principle issue, he would have resigned at Chequers on Friday night, if not in the run-up to that meeting. He left it until after David Davis resigned and was dragged into resignation. This Boris Johnson resignation is all about securing the interests of Boris Johnson, not the nation, and certainly not the Tory party.
OK, so Phillip, we're hearing from Lee that this is not principled. However, reading the man's resignation letter, he's saying we're truly headed for the status of a colony. The dream is dying, suffocated by needless self-doubt. Has Lee been a bit unfair on Johnson? Was Johnson really and sincerely in favour of a hard Brexit, and he felt that, I don't know, Theresa May was just selling out?
I don't know if Boris Johnson is sincerely and consistently in favour of any one thing. So I think Boris Johnson going, in one sense, is neither here nor there, because what it effectively does is strengthen the hand of Theresa May. So on the one hand, we have a Prime Minister that's called weak, but she keeps lasting because those who want to remove her are weaker than she is. And she's now got a much more unified cabinet. She's got a deal behind which that cabinet has unified that she wishes to put to the European Union. Doubtless there'll be further changes, but it seems very difficult for the Brexiteers to now do very much about it because they lack the numbers, apparently, to cause a leadership election. They've got no guarantee that one of their own, a Brexiteer, will become leader. And they themselves, because of the deal that's been struck in Parliament, now only realistically have the option of forcing a crash out of the EU without a deal. And it's not clear that they'd necessarily want to do that either. So there's no majority in Parliament for any one course. Yep. And generally speaking, that means that the Prime Minister's course may well yet win through.
Thom, what I find really interesting is Phillip saying, you know, the Brexiteers, they've been weakened and so forth. Brexit is happening, as far as I'm aware, with, 2 years down the line. Is the entire notion of Brexit now under question, or just the method of Brexit is just going to be far more soft and a compromise between the European Union and Theresa May's government?
Well, I think, Theresa May said that Brexit means Brexit a couple of years ago, and we've still been trying to work out exactly what those words mean. After almost 2 years of waiting to find out, she only the other day, for the only time, gets her cabinet together to discuss what their collective view will be. 48 hours later, the person who led the Vote Leave successful campaign leaves saying this isn't Brexit to him, and the person who is politically in charge of as Brexit secretary leaves saying he doesn't think this is the Brexit himself either. I think that she's got herself a real mess, because I think the nature of compromise, the nature of trying to win over different factions, whether it be in the Tory party or whether it be across the country, seems to be, is definitely a tall order. And I think it's a given that everyone's going to be disappointed. I think Leavers and Remainers alike will be disappointed. Perhaps her hand is strengthened in a cabinet right now that is a bit more to her liking for today. There may well be more resignations happening soon, but I don't think her hand is strengthened in Parliament. She now has more enemies who are now wishing to see this deal fall. There'll be lots of others in other parties wanting to see this deal fall. And if there was a way of making some type of change, then perhaps that will happen. I mean, I think that what she means by Brexit and illusory customs deals and other types of things isn't what Boris means by Brexit. It's not what Nigel Farage means by Brexit. It's not what anyone, not what George Galloway has meant by Brexit. You know, left, right, centre, up, down, diagonal. This is not anyone's Brexit.
2 years on, nobody knows what Brexit means, and that's fascinating and I guess a lesson in itself. Lee, for those, there are those who believe that she was selling out on trade and she was going too soft and diluting Brexit, those hard Brexiteers, as we would call them. Now, they're out of the way by their own choice. They resigned. If you were the European Commission, Lee, what would you do next?
I'd tell Britain to go back to the drawing board, because I'm absolutely sure that this existential crisis for the Tory party, ripped asunder as it is on the issue of Europe, is going to return with a vengeance when the European Parliament and Claude Juncker rejects the substantive proposals as outlined in the Chequers Accord. It's all right having unity, but when you have a unity of a government around a position that is not likely to survive as an objective reality, then all you're doing is kicking the can further down the road. We've had 2 years, 2 whole years since the referendum, in which Theresa May and all the others have had plenty of time to think about, run through the scenarios, test the models, come up with a plan that works for Britain. They've not been able to do so, not because of any political strife within the Tory party necessarily in itself, but the sheer edifice of disentanglement of economic, cultural, policy, legislation from Europe is such a behemoth, such an edifice of bureaucracy, that even the civil servants have said to them, even if we had a full complement of civil servants, it'd probably still take us 25 years to work through these complex scenarios. So I think Brexit, the Chequers plan is dead, that they've unified around a position that ultimately will be rejected. And although she may last until the summer, I'm sure that when the European Parliament responds in October later this year, this will return to haunt Theresa May.
Philip, I'm guessing you disagree that this position will be rejected by the Europeans.
It's the beginning of the dialogue, and I think that what May has done is she started to define Brexit, and it means that we have some sort of common alignment for goods, which is only 20% of the economy, and we don't yet have any agreement for services. So this is actually what an agreement looks like. And the point is that
it's nowhere near an agreement.
Biggest majority in Parliament, the biggest majority in Parliament is against no deal. Now, Parliament has the ability to vote down whatever deal Theresa May comes up with, but then the alternative is only no deal. So we are going to get a deal, and Theresa May currently looks like the ones who'll be able to deliver it, depending on securing the wider agreement in Parliament, which I think she will get. So I repeat, she's now in a stronger position than she was, mainly because her enemies are now in a much weaker position. The Tory party don't have an alternative. They don't have an alternative plan they all agree on, and they certainly don't have an alternative leader that they all agree on. And they fear that if they keep engaging in internal dispute, they will just leave the door open for the Labour Party, which itself doesn't have a settled view on Brexit either.
Why is Labour so happy? I mean, if this has really strengthened her, why is the Labour Party jumping for joy right now, or at least Labour members and Labour supporters?
Well, I think they see division and consternation, and generally that helps the opposing party. But I don't think it's at anything like a level that would guarantee Labour's success. I still think that Theresa May has shown extraordinary tenacity, and I think that post-Brexit, the the Conservative Party can hand over to a new leader who can come up with the type of visionary agenda that's needed to speak to the needs of the people who voted for Brexit. So I would still think the Conservative Party, against a Labour Party led by Jeremy Corbyn, are still likely to win the next general election. So I think everybody's celebrations or misery, they're all overdone. I think the most likely outcome is that May will eventually deliver on some form of the deal that she already has agreed at Chequers. So it isn't dead by any means.
OK, and going to Thom in Durham. Thom, for those who look at it from the outside and say, if the Foreign Secretary has resigned and you've had a spate of resignations, is the leadership of the Prime Minister in question? Is her head possibly on the chopping block? Your answer is what?
Well, I think she is in serious trouble. I take the point that there's not very serious contenders, or so it might look right now. But I think people, people will rise to the occasion. There are folks right now who are popular with Conservative Party members. There are people who are popular with members of Parliament right now. There are names that are being talked about, and secretive leadership bids and all but name launched right now. So I think that it's not quite clear that she is as strong and as happy and as wonderful as has been said. I mean, so she's starting a dialogue. She's starting a dialogue right now in the middle of July. She's giving it not even 90 days to have some agreement with the Europeans before it's just too late to have any deal to vote up or down. She's putting all of her eggs in a basket that her Brexit Secretary and Foreign Secretary have rejected, as have others at that meeting, at least anecdotally, that we've had reports from, who said the same things that we now know are confirmed true, said from David Davis and Boris Johnson. And I think that to say, well, at least she's got a deal and there's no real alternative or time for other parties to come up with something, so therefore she's going to get her way. I think this is just the worst of all possible outcomes at the worst possible time. And if I was the European Commission and I was looking at this, I would agree with Lee. I'd say to the Prime Minister to go back to the drawing board, because I don't think that Britain crashing out and Britain having a big implosion in front of our eyes in such spectacular fashion like this is in the interest of Britain, nor is it in the interest of the European Union. I think that the Prime Minister needs to hold her hand up and take responsibility for coming to this far too late. She should have had this meeting before she triggered Article 50. She should have been doing this certainly a year or so or more ago. But she is in the position that she's in. They're now starting to think a little bit more seriously than they were before about what happens. They have a fanciful plan here that wouldn't convince anyone I know who is serious, especially on customs and borders in Ireland. And I think she's going to need more time, and I think she should beg and ask for it effectively.
Okay, Lee Jasper.
Because if she doesn't have it, we're in real trouble.
Okay, Lee Jasper, 29th of March 2019. That's the agreed upon deadline. All of this has to get done by then. I know you're a Labour man. I know you're a Remainer. What kind of deal would you accept by then, where they can come to you and say, OK, we're formally leaving the European Union, but this is how we're going to do it? What kind of deal would you accept?
Well, we'd want one that certainly protects, prioritises the protection of jobs and the economy. And that's got to be within the context of a single market and the customs union. And so we've got to have a deal from Europe that facilitates not only the democratic wishes of the public who voted, from my perspective at least, with a great deal of lack of information, with propaganda from the other side, lies written on the side of buses. This is the campaign that led to the yes vote. But if we are to have this Brexit, then it has to be one that protects jobs and services. And currently what we're seeing from the Chequers meeting is a plan and a proposal that is ultimately going to be rejected. Maybe not in whole, but certainly in some in terms of the substantive part, certainly on the issues of free movement, certainly on the issues of regulatory alignment and so on. That
Right.
You're either in the European Union or you're not. Britain is not going to get no special deal. Britain exceptionalism is a myth. Britain thinks it's more powerful than it actually is. And the Prime Minister has been happy to indulge the public in those fallacies, which all have now become into sharp relief as we tick-tock the end of that political clock, which says we've got to get this deal done by March next year.
Right. Well, I've been covering this for, what, 2.5 years in the build-up to the referendum and beyond the referendum. We've done multiple shows on this, and I can tell you all, gentlemen, it's one of those stories that gets less clear as you go along. It becomes more and more nebulous. You can chew on that. Seriously, I don't know what to make of that. But gentlemen, I thank you all for joining us here on the Newsmakers, Lee, Thom, and Philip.
Thank
Thanks
you.
again.